Welcome back, everyone. We're doing a deep dive today into something pretty important, something you spend a third of your life doing,
Yeah.
sleeping. But how much do we really know about those hours we spend asleep?
I know what you mean. I spend a lot of time thinking about sleep, but I feel like there's always so much more to learn.
Well, luckily for us, we've got a great guide for today's deep dive, Matthew Walker's Why We Sleep. The book is packed with insights into the science behind sleep. We're talking everything from evolution to how sleep can impact your creativity and health.
It is a fascinating book. I know I learned a lot reading it.
I did too. In fact, I bet you our listeners are going to come away with some eye-opening facts after today. Did you know that being sleep deprived is basically like driving drunk?
Yeah, that one blew me away too. But then there are also these cool facts like how some of history's greatest creative breakthroughs might actually be thanks to sleep.
Yeah.
Crazy, right?
Yeah. But let's not get ahead of ourselves. Let's start with the basics. Why do we sleep? I mean, think about it from an evolutionary standpoint. Sleep makes us vulnerable, right?
Right. Can't protect ourselves or find food as easily when we're asleep.
So there have to be some pretty big evolutionary advantages to outweigh the risks, don't you think?
For sure, and there are. Sleep is super important for our bodies and minds to recharge, to restore themselves. It's actually when we sleep that our cells get to work, repairing themselves. Our muscles rebuild, our brains process emotions, and our memories consolidate. Sleep is actually a biological need, just like eating or breathing.
No kidding. You literally can't survive without it.
Nope.
It's amazing how all these intricate systems in our bodies work, to keep us functioning.
It really is.
And speaking of those systems, I thought it was super interesting how Walker's book told this story about a plant's internal clock. It was discovered way back in the 1700s.
Oh, yeah. The French geophysicist Jean-Jacques Doutu de Maron. He was studying this plant that followed the sun's movements. And he kept it in the dark, for an experiment. But the leaves still moved in a rhythmic pattern.
No way, even without the sun.
Yeah, even in constant darkness.
So even way back then, scientists were thinking about these biological rhythms. That's wild.
Yeah.
Makes you think, with all the artificial light and stimulation we have today, our phones, our computers, even streetlights, it's like we're constantly bathed in light. Do you think it's messing with our natural sleep patterns?
Absolutely. I mean, think about it. We're still exposed to light long after the sunset.
Right.
And that disrupts our melatonin production.
Melatonin being the sleep hormone, right?
Uh-huh. The one that tells your body it's time to sleep.
It's almost like we're tricking our bodies into thinking it's still daytime.
Yeah, exactly.
You know what this reminds me of?
What?
The book talks about shops in Greece, how they used to close in the afternoon for a siesta.
Oh, yeah, the siesta culture.
Yeah.
Taking bar break in the middle of the day.
Yeah. But when people abandoned that practice, Harvard did a study that showed that there was actually an increase in cardiovascular problems.
Oh.
It really makes you think about how important it is to, align our lifestyles with our natural biological rhythms.
It really does.
But let's get into those rhythms a little bit more. You mentioned different types of sleep, and NREM and REM. Can you break those down for us?
Sure. So those are the two main types of sleep that we cycle through. NREM stands for non-rapid eye movement sleep.
Okay.
And then there's REM, which stands for rapid eye movement.
Gotcha. So what's the difference? What happens in these two sleep stages?
Well, NREM sleep actually has 3 stages, and they get deeper as you go through them. It's during those deeper stages that our bodies really go to work,
Okay.
repairing tissue, balancing hormones, consolidating memories,
So basically a deep clean for the body and mind.
pretty much.
Wow. And then what about REM sleep? What happens there?
REM sleep is where things get really interesting. It's when our brains are very active and our eyes move rapidly.
Okay.
It's also when we experience those vivid, sometimes crazy dreams.
Wait, hold on. You're saying our brains are more active during REM sleep than when we're awake. How is that even possible?
Well, some parts of the brain do show increased activity during REM sleep, yeah. And it's thought to be really important for creativity, emotional processing, even learning.
Wow. And that makes me think of another interesting tidbit from the book. Did you know that humans have way more REM sleep than other primates?
You're right.
It's pretty surprising.
And scientists think it might be tied to our complex cognitive abilities,
Right.
and how we've developed these really intricate social structures.
Fascinating. So basically, REM sleep could be a part of what makes us uniquely human.
It could be, yeah.
That's amazing. But let me ask you this. Have you ever woken up after what should have been a good night's sleep but still felt totally exhausted?
Oh, yeah. I think we've all been there.
What's that all about?
Well, you might be carrying a sleep debt.
A sleep debt, is that like a credit card bill for sleep? You just keep racking up charges
Kinda, yeah.
until you're drowning in exhaustion?
Exactly. Even those small amounts of sleep loss, they add up over time. And it can have some pretty big consequences for our health and well-being.
And the author Matthew Walker talks about his own struggles with jet lag, especially when flying eastward. He talks about how our bodies want to stretch the day because of a slightly longer natural circadian rhythm.
Right.
So even these minor sleep disruptions can have a big impact.
Definitely.
And speaking of impact, let's talk about the real consequences of not getting enough sleep. This statistic from the book was pretty scary. Did you know that driving on less than 5 hours of sleep actually triples your risk of being in a car crash?
Yeah.
And if you're running on 4 hours of sleep or less, that risk jumps to 11 and a half times higher.
It's crazy, right? And people underestimate drowsy driving all the time. It's as bad as drunk driving, but no one really talks about it.
That's true.
Yeah.
And, the book tells this really heartbreaking story about a truck driver who caused a fatal accident because he'd been awake for 34 hours straight.
Oh, wow.
It's a reminder that sleep deprivation isn't just about feeling tired.
You're right.
It can have some really serious, even life or death consequences.
It's true. And it's not just about physical safety either. Being sleep deprived messes with your cognitive function too.
Like how so?
You're less alert, less focused, more likely to make mistakes. There was a study that showed how sleep deprived people performed just as poorly on tests as people who were legally drunk.
So you're saying pulling an all-nighter is kind of like voluntarily getting behind the wheel while you're over the legal limit? That's scary.
It is.
And it's not just our thinking that gets fuzzy when we don't sleep enough. I mean, what about our emotions?
Oh, that too. Sleep deprivation can really mess with your emotional regulation.
Really? Does it make us more emotional?
You could say that. The amygdala, which processes emotions, gets super active when you're sleep deprived.
Okay.
But the prefrontal cortex, the part that helps us make rational decisions, that gets suppressed. So it's like your emotional gas pedal is stuck and the brakes aren't working.
Oh, wow. So we're more likely to overreact and make bad decisions when we're tired? This is especially worrisome when you think about all those students pulling all-nighters to study.
Right. And research shows that not sleeping enough actually makes it harder to learn.
Really?
Yeah, it negatively impacts the hippocampus, which is a key area for memory formation.
So those all-night cram sessions might be doing more harm than good?
It could be, yeah.
Wow. Well, let's switch gears a bit. What about the physical effects of sleep deprivation? We all know it can increase the risk for some pretty major health issues.
That's right. Things like cardiovascular disease, diabetes, obesity, even some cancers.
That's a scary list.
Yeah.
But how does sleep deprivation contribute to all of these? Is it a direct cause or is it more complex than that?
It's complex. There are a lot of factors involved, but when you're sleep deprived, your hormones get out of whack, and that can really contribute to these health problems.
Okay.
One example is that sleep deprivation increases the hormone ghrelin.
Ghrelin.
It's the hormone that makes us feel hungry.
Oh.
But at the same time, it decreases leptin, the hormone that tells us we're full.
So we're hungrier and we don't know when to stop eating.
Yeah, pretty much.
That makes a lot of sense then. Why there's such a strong link between sleep deprivation and obesity.
It does.
What about our immune systems? How does sleep affect how we fight off infections?
Well, not sleeping enough actually weakens the immune system, so we're more likely to get sick.
Oh, no.
And there's even research suggesting it can increase the risk of some cancers, maybe because of chronic inflammation or reduced activity in those natural killer cells that help our bodies fight off cancer.
That's frightening. It sounds like sleep deprivation is a recipe for disaster for both our minds and bodies.
It really is. And it's not just what happens to us individually. Sleep deprivation has this ripple effect.
Yeah.
It impacts society as a whole.
Right. Like we're talking drowsy driving accidents and medical errors, things like that.
Exactly. Think about productivity, creativity, innovation, you name it. When people aren't getting enough sleep, they just can't function at their best.
It's like trying to run a marathon on an empty stomach,
Yeah.
You might be able to push through for a while, but you're going to hit a wall eventually.
Exactly. And
Yeah.
that wall can have some pretty serious consequences, not just for the individual, but for organizations, even countries.
It makes me think about how competitive everything is these days. Like everyone is trying to do more, achieve more, be more, and it seems like sleep is the first thing to go.
Yeah, you're right. We live in a culture that praises busyness. It's like sleep is seen as laziness or a sign of weakness. It's crazy. I've even heard people brag about how little sleep they get. Like, oh, I only need 4 hours a night.
But we've seen the research. That's a recipe for disaster. It's like bragging about how much junk food you eat or how little you
Uh,
exercise. It's just not sustainable.
I agree. We need to change how we think about sleep. Start viewing it as an investment in our health and well-being, you know, and even our
But it's
success.
not just about quantity, right? It's about quality, too.
Yes, we need to make sure we're getting enough sleep, but it also needs to be good sleep. And this brings us to sleep disorders. Insomnia, for example.
Oh, right. It's more than just tossing and turning every now and then, isn't it?
It is. Insomnia is a real chronic condition that impacts people's lives.
So how do we know if it's just a bad night's sleep or if it's actually insomnia? We all have trouble sleeping sometimes.
It's true, we do. But to be diagnosed with insomnia, you have to have sleep difficulties at least 3 nights a week. And it has to go on for longer than 3 months.
Oh, wow. So that's a pretty long time.
It is. And these difficulties have to cause real distress or problems in your everyday life.
So it's not just the hours of sleep you're getting, but how that lack of sleep is affecting you during the day.
That's right. And while anxiety and stress definitely play a part, research shows that an overactive fight or flight response can be a major contributor to insomnia.
So people with insomnia are basically stuck in go mode, even when their bodies are trying to rest.
Pretty much, yeah. This constant state of arousal makes it really hard to relax and fall asleep.
And I imagine this is where sleeping pills come in, to help people quiet their minds and drift off.
Yeah, people often see sleeping pills as a quick fix. But it's important to understand that they don't actually induce natural sleep. They
Mhm.
basically just sedate the brain, which isn't the same as experiencing the restorative benefits of actually sleeping.
So they knock you out, but they don't address the real issue.
You got it. And there's a growing concern about using sleeping pills long term. Some research has even linked them to an increased risk of mortality and cancer.
Wait, hold on. You're saying sleeping pills can be more harmful than helpful.
Well, it's complicated, but the research suggests we should be really careful about relying on them for too long. There are usually safer, more effective options out there.
So what are those options? What can people with insomnia do to sleep better without medication?
Well, there's a type of therapy called cognitive behavioral therapy for insomnia. We call it CBTI for short.
CBTI. So it's like talk therapy to change your thoughts and behaviors around sleep.
Exactly. It helps people figure out what thoughts and actions are making their insomnia worse and then learn how to change them.
Interesting. So it could involve things like having a regular sleep schedule, a wind-down routine before bed, stuff like that.
Exactly. And learning to challenge those negative thoughts about sleep. It's much more holistic than just popping a pill.
It sounds like it.
Ah.
And is it effective?
Oh, yeah. Studies show it's more effective than sleeping pills in the long run. And it doesn't have all those scary risks.
That's good to hear. It sounds like there's hope for people struggling with insomnia.
Yeah.
But you mentioned earlier that sleep deprivation affects society in ways that go beyond individual health. Can you say more about that?
Of course. One area where we see the impact really clearly is healthcare.
Okay.
Healthcare workers often have these really long, demanding shifts,
Yeah.
and that can lead to chronic sleep deprivation for doctors, nurses, and everyone else involved in patient care.
It's a little scary to think that the people taking care of our health might be making decisions when they're completely exhausted.
I know. And research shows that sleep deprivation is linked to an increased risk of medical errors, which obviously can have devastating consequences.
I read somewhere that medical errors are the third leading cause of death in the United States.
That's right. And while it's hard to say exactly how many of those are because of sleep deprivation, studies have shown a clear link between fatigue and mistakes.
Do you have any examples?
Well, one study found that medical residents working a 30-hour shift made 36% more serious medical errors compared to those who worked 16 hours or less.
Oh, wow.
And another study found that sleep-deprived residents made 460% more diagnostic errors in the ICU.
That's a huge increase. It's like playing Russian roulette with people's lives.
It is, and it really highlights the need to address this culture of sleep deprivation in healthcare.
But why are healthcare workers pushed to work such grueling hours in the first place? There has to be a better way to train doctors and care for patients that doesn't put everyone at risk.
It's complicated with roots going way back. The system we have now is actually thanks to a guy named William Stewart Halstead. He was a prominent physician, but get this, he was a cocaine addict.
A cocaine addict? I
Yeah.
don't see how that connects to medical training.
Well, in the early days of surgery, cocaine was actually used as an anesthetic. Halstead, being an addict, believed doctors should be able to work long hours without sleep, just like he did under the influence. And that belief shaped residency programs. pushing young doctors to work these long, crazy hours with barely any rest.
Wow, talk about a bad influence.
Yeah.
But surely the medical community has recognized the need for change by now. There's so much research about the dangers of sleep deprivation.
There have been some changes, but we still have a long way to go. Current guidelines limit residents to 80 hours a week, and they can't work more than 24 hours straight.
That's good, right?
Well, even those limits are way beyond what our brains can handle to function properly. And we're talking about healthcare where everything is high stakes.
It sounds like a vicious cycle.
Yeah.
We know sleep deprivation is dangerous, yet we keep this system going that puts both healthcare workers and patients at risk.
You're right. It's a tough problem. But we have to start by recognizing it and advocating for change. We need a new culture in medicine that prioritizes everyone's well-being, patients and healthcare providers alike.
It's literally a matter of life and death.
It is.
Well, let's move on to another area where sleep deprivation is a problem: education. I think we can all relate to trying to stay awake in class after pulling an all-nighter.
Right. And it's not just about individual students nodding off in class. The real problem is school start times, especially for teenagers.
Are you saying schools start too early?
Exactly. Teenagers' body clocks are naturally shifted later than adults,
Okay.
so they're not biologically ready to be alert and focused at like 7 or 7:30 in the morning.
So we're asking them to be at their best when their bodies are telling them it's the middle of the night.
Yeah, pretty much. It's like asking an owl to hunt during the day. And the effects are real. Studies show that later school start times lead to better grades, fewer absences, and even fewer car accidents.
That makes total sense. But it's more than just grades, isn't it? Early start times could also be really bad for teenagers' mental health.
Absolutely.
You talk about how important REM sleep is for processing emotions, and teenagers get a lot of it in those early morning hours.
Right. So depriving them of that sleep can really impact their emotional well-being. It's like setting them up for mood swings, anxiety, even depression.
Like adding fuel to the fire of adolescence, which is already an emotional roller coaster.
Exactly. And we see this connection between sleep disorders and ADHD in kids, too.
Wait, are you saying some kids are being diagnosed with ADHD when the real problem is lack of sleep?
It's possible. Sleep deprivation can look a lot like ADHD. Difficulty concentrating, impulsivity, hyperactivity, they all overlap.
That's a really important point.
Yeah.
So how do we know if it's sleep or ADHD?
Well, it's crucial to look at the child's sleep habits, really evaluate the situation. Sometimes just addressing the sleep problem makes a huge difference.
Wow.
The kid's behavior improves, their grades go up, and they might not even need ADHD medication anymore.
It's incredible to think something as simple as getting enough sleep can have such a big impact. But then it's scary to think how many kids might be misdiagnosed and put on medication because of sleep problems.
You're right. It's really important to take a holistic approach, Consider all the factors that could be playing a role, and sleep is definitely one of them.
So we're back to the idea of sleep as a foundation for a healthy and productive life, not just for individuals, but for society as a whole.
Exactly. Sleep is a basic human right, just like having clean water and food. It's crucial for everyone to thrive.
It's amazing to think of it that way. Sleep is a human right.
Mm.
I mean, it's something we take for granted, but as we've learned today, it's so important for our well-being in so many ways.
It really is. And it's more than just about us changing our individual habits. We need to advocate for changes in society that make sleep a priority.
Yeah.
Things like later school start times and more reasonable working hours in fields like healthcare. Those things can make a big difference.
Totally. We need a culture that values sleep, not one that sees it as a weakness or something to be sacrificed for productivity.
Exactly.
But let's talk about things we can do ourselves right now. What about technology? Can it play a role in helping us sleep better?
Oh, absolutely. I think there's huge potential there. Imagine a smart home, where the lights slowly dim as bedtime approaches,
Right.
and the thermostat adjusts to your ideal sleep temperature. Maybe it even plays soothing sounds to help you drift off.
Ooh, that sounds amazing.
Yeah.
Like having your own personal sleep concierge. What about those sleep trackers, though? The ones that are so popular now. Do they actually help?
I think they can be helpful for some people. They give you all this data about your sleep patterns. And sometimes that can be a real eye-opener, seeing how much deep sleep you're getting or how often you wake up during the night. It can really motivate you to make changes.
So it's about awareness, giving people the information they need to take control of their sleep.
Exactly. But remember, technology is a tool. And like any tool, it can be used in ways that are helpful or harmful. So no scrolling through social media on your phone in bed.
Right. That blue light from our devices isn't doing us any favors.
Definitely not. Put the phone down, step away from the screens, maybe pick up a book instead.
Or listen to a relaxing podcast
Exactly.
like this one. But speaking of our podcast, we've covered a lot of ground today in our deep dive into why we sleep. What are the biggest takeaways you hope listeners will remember?
The main thing I want to emphasize is that sleep isn't a luxury.
Right.
It's a biological necessity, just as important as eating, drinking, and breathing. You can't thrive without it.
We've seen the proof, haven't we? Lack of sleep affects our physical and mental health, our ability to think clearly, our emotions, our decision-making, everything.
It really does. And it's not just about the individual either. Sleep deprivation ripples out and affects society too. It leads to accidents, mistakes at work, lower productivity, and even problems in relationships.
Talk about a wake-up call.
It is, but the good news is that we can do things to make sleep a priority.
Yeah, both as individuals and as a society, right?
Absolutely.
So on a personal level, we can start by making sure we have a regular sleep schedule, a relaxing bedtime routine, and a sleep environment that's cool, dark, and quiet. And if you're really struggling, don't be afraid to get help.
Yeah,
There are really effective therapies out there like CBTI.
definitely.
They can make a huge difference. And as a society, we have to advocate for policies that support healthy sleep, like those later school start times for teens, for example.
Yes, and reasonable work hours in demanding jobs.
Exactly. We need to educate people about how important sleep is and change that "I'll sleep when I'm dead" mentality that's so common.
Right. It's about changing our mindset and valuing sleep, not seeing it as a sign of weakness or something to be sacrificed in the name of productivity.
Well said.
We need to recognize that sleep is a basic human right, essential for our individual and collective well-being.
This deep dive has definitely been eye-opening for me. I know I'm going to be paying more attention to my own sleep habits from now on.
Me too. It's time we all wake up to the power of sleep and start living our best, most well-rested lives.
I love it. Well, that's a fantastic message to end on. Thank you so much for joining us for this deep dive into why we sleep. Until next time, everyone, sleep well.